He was still smiling when I stood up. The sound of my chair scraping across the marble floor sliced through the organ music. Every head turned. For a moment, no one breathed. My husband's smile froze into something tighter, the sort of grin people mistake for charm when they don't know what it hides. "Sit down, Elaine," he hissed the words, barely moving his lips. I didn't. My knees trembled inside the silk, but my hands were steady. At the altar, our daughter, my radiant, trembling Lydia, had just repeated his words as part of her vows. The same tone, the same practiced humor. Strong women know when to stay quiet. The crowd had laughed. Even the priest smiled as if it were clever. The echo still rang inside me louder than the applause that followed. I looked at my husband and saw 30 years of that same performance, the jokes, the dismissive pats, the practiced sympathy that never reached his eyes. The moment Lydia's voice carried his cruelty, I understood how perfectly I had taught her to listen to him, not to me. I walked toward the front, each step a tiny rebellion against the hush. My heels clicked slow and deliberate. Someone gasped. Someone whispered my name. I could smell the lilies sweet and rotting under the heat of the candles. Robert shifted beside the priest, trying to intercept me with his eyes. "Elaine, please." He murmured that warning tone he'd used for decades, smooth as oil. I took the microphone from the stand. My reflection trembled in the metal base, distorted but still there. My voice sounded calm, almost detached. "This wedding is over." The air split open. Murmurs rippled through the pews, then grew into waves of confusion. Lydia blinked at me, still holding her bouquet like a shield. "Mom," she whispered. "I can't let you start your marriage this way," I said. "Not with those words, not while they belong to him." Robert's jaw tightened. "Elaine, you're embarrassing yourself." That word again, yourself, as if his comfort were the measure of my shame. I turned toward the guests, all those familiar faces who had seen our family as enviable, polite whole. "You've all been so kind," I told them. "You've all heard him joke about me, haven't you? For years." You laughed. I did too. But today, I heard my daughter repeat it, and I realized laughter can sound like inheritance. The priest took a small step back. Grace, the wedding planner, froze near the floral arch, hands clasped. Her eyes met mine. No shock, just a quiet understanding. Robert moved closer, voice low. "Stop this now." "No." I said the single syllable heavier than any vow I had ever spoken. "You taught her to mock love. I won't let you teach her what endurance looks like." The church fell still again. Even the chandeliers seemed to hold their breath. I handed the microphone to Grace. "Please let everyone know the ceremony is canceled." Lydia's bouquet slipped from her fingers, scattering petals across the white aisle. She stared at me, lips parted, eyes flickering between her father and me. I wanted to reach for her to explain, to gather every apology I never gave, but my body refused to move. Some part of me knew she needed to see me stand, not bend. Robert's face darkened, his voice rising for the first time. "You've lost your mind." "No," I said quietly. "I've just stopped losing myself." The sentence left me trembling. The guests were whispering, some standing, some pretending not to look. The organist's hands hovered over the keys, unsure whether to fill the silence. Grace cleared her throat gently and spoke to the crowd. "There will be a short intermission," she said, her professionalism somehow holding the chaos together. I stepped down from the platform. Every step felt lighter. My heart pounded, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was movement, the pulse of something living under all those years of quiet. As I reached the aisle, Lydia called after me. "Mom, wait." I paused but didn't turn. "When you're ready to listen," I said, not to repeat. "I'll be here." Then I walked past the rows of faces, out through the heavy doors, and into the open air. The sunlight hit my face like a revelation, too bright, too honest to hide in. The wind lifted the edge of my veil and carried it behind me, a small flag of surrender and victory, all at once. For the first time in 30 years, the silence that followed him belonged to me. The morning of the wedding began in a silence so polished it almost gleamed. Every sound felt rehearsed, the whisper of tool brushing tile, the muted hum of the hairdryer, even my daughter's laughter drifting down the hallway. Lydia's laughter used to be warm and clumsy, the kind that invited you to join her. Today it was controlled thin, like glass spinning on a fingertip. I stood in the doorway of her suite, watching her reflection multiply in the vanity mirror. She was beautiful, yes, but not in the soft way I remembered. There was calculation in the tilt of her chin, in the precision of her smile. Robert hovered behind her, adjusting the pearl necklace he'd given her that morning. He looked like the proud sculptor standing beside his finest work. "Almost time," he said. "Let's not be late, Lydia. You know your mother gets anxious when things fall apart." The stylist chuckled politely. Lydia's lips curved. I felt my stomach twist. "I'm fine," I said quietly. But he was already focused on the mirror, his reflection cutting me out of the frame. Grace appeared in the doorway behind me, clipboard in hand, wearing the calm of someone who had seen too many weddings survive small disasters. "Elaine, sweetheart, I'll need you in the foyer in 20 minutes, she said softly, giving me a look that lingered longer than necessary. I nodded. Robert noticed. "Still letting Grace run your life, huh?" he said. "You always did love an audience." I smiled the way I had learned to smile careful and visible. "She's good at her job," I replied. When he left to check the schedule, the room loosened its breath. I approached Lydia. "You look beautiful," I said, meaning it. She glanced at me, eyes bright. "Dad wanted pearls. He said they're traditional." "You always said pearls felt too heavy," I reminded her. Her smile tightened. Maybe I grew up. There it was, that faint echo of him again, wrapped in sweetness. My fingers brushed the lace on her sleeve. "You can still make your own choices," I said, unsure if I was talking to her or to myself. Her gaze met mine in the mirror. "Mom, I love you, but please don't start. Not today." I stepped back, nodding as though agreement could fill the hollow in my chest. "Of course." Outside the suite, the corridor smelled of flowers and furniture polish. Grace was arranging programs near the entrance, murmuring instructions to staff. She caught my arm gently as I passed. "You okay?" she asked under her breath. "I'm fine," I said again, the lie sounding smoother each time. She leaned closer. "He's been on edge all morning. I heard him snapping at the caterers about invoices. If he's pressuring you," I cut her off with a smile. "It's his way of helping." Her eyes told me she didn't believe it, but she let it go. "If anything feels wrong," she whispered, "find me." When she walked away, I watched her silver hair catch the light. Grace had been there 20 years ago, when Robert and I renewed our vows before she moved out of town. Back then, she told me I looked tired. I had laughed and said, happiness ages everyone differently. Now, standing in the floral chaos of my daughter's wedding, I realized how much that had sounded like surrender. I wandered into the chapel before guests arrived. The altar gleamed with white lilies, their scent heavy and cloying. The pews were lined with satin ribbons, each one perfectly tied. Everything was symmetrical. No surprises, no imperfections. Robert loved symmetry. It made control look like order. I ran my fingers along the edge of the first pew, remembering the day we chose this church. Lydia was 9, spinning in circles down the aisle, while Robert lectured the pastor about lighting angles for photographs. I had thought it was charming, then his attention to detail. Now the memory felt like warning I'd ignored. The heavy doors opened behind me. Robert entered, footsteps echoing across the marble. "You're supposed to be with the bridesmaids," he said, his tone soft but sharp around the edges. "I wanted a minute alone," I replied. He straightened his cufflinks, watching me. "Try not to get emotional later. It's Lydia's day." "I know." He came closer, lowering his voice. "You always make things about you, Elaine. Just smile and behave." That familiar chill slid down my spine, the one I'd mistaken for cold air for years. I nodded automatically, but he wasn't done. "If you start crying during my speech again, it'll ruin the photos." My emotions are mine, I said, before I could stop myself. His eyes narrowed, calculating, and then he smiled, charming again. Audience ready. Of course, darling. He left me standing in the echo of his cologne. Outside, laughter rose from the foyer as guests began arriving. I could hear Grace greeting them, the rustle of dresses, the shuffle of programs. The noise should have felt comforting, but it pressed against me like a tide. I moved to the window. Across the courtyard, Lydia posed for photos, her veil glimmering like water. She leaned into her father's shoulder, and he whispered something that made her laugh again, the same brittle sound from earlier. I remembered holding her as a child, when she scraped her knees whispering stories until her sobs turned to hiccups. I wondered when that softness had been replaced by mimicry. Grace appeared beside me again, speaking gently. "You don't have to stand in the back." "I like the view from here," I said. She studied my face. "You look like you're waiting for something." "Maybe I am," I answered. "Maybe for it to stop feeling like performance." She tilted her head. "You've been rehearsing survival a long time. Don't let today be another act." I smiled, but it faltered halfway. "It's too late for new scripts." Grace's expression softened. "It's never too late to call cut." Before I could respond, the organist began to play the prelude. The music swelled grand and familiar, and people started filing into the pews. I turned back to the aisle that would soon hold my daughter in white, her father at her side. The symmetry was perfect again. And yet somewhere beneath the notes, I could feel the quiet crack beginning to form. The rehearsal dinner had been perfect. At least that was the word Robert used. "Perfect," he said, raising his glass, the sound of silverware pausing midair. Everyone smiled the way they were supposed to. Lydia leaned her head on his shoulder, and I watched the two of them glow under the string lights like actors in a scene that had been staged too many times. Grace sat across from me, her polite smile flickering as she followed my gaze. "It's lovely," she said softly. "It is," I replied, though my voice felt like it belonged to someone else. Robert continued. "You know, Lydia gets her poise from her mother. I mean, Elaine cries at everything, so I guess some of it had to skip a generation." The guests laughed, the practiced rhythm of people trained not to look uncomfortable. Lydia laughed too. That laugh again, crisp, rehearsed, almost proud of its cruelty. Something cold unfurled in my chest. I smiled, poured more wine, and reminded myself to breathe. This was how it always began, a joke dressed as affection, an insult mistaken for intimacy. When the laughter died down, I caught Grace's eyes again. She gave a small shake of her head, the kind you give when words would only make things worse. After dinner, while everyone drifted toward the patio for photos, I slipped into the quiet of the hallway. The chandeliers hummed softly. My reflection in the mirror looked calm, composed, and nothing like the woman inside. Their voices reached me from the other side of the door, Robert's low and assured, Lydia's soft, almost girlish. "Dad, do you think Mom will cry tomorrow?" she asked. "She always does," he said, amused. "If she does, just smile. It's how she gets attention. Don't feed into it." I know, she said, laughter threading through the words. "Strong women know when to stay quiet." He laughed, pleased. "That's my girl." The sound landed like a blade against bone. I backed away from the door, pressing my hands against my chest. The hallway tilted slightly. The carpet seemed to pulse. I had thought I'd imagined the similarities, the way she repeated him, the way she looked to him for approval. But this was no coincidence. This was inheritance. Grace found me minutes later, her voice a whisper. "Elaine, you look pale. Do you need to sit?" "I'm fine," I said automatically, but my throat ached. "You're not," she murmured. "He's been talking to her like that for months. I've heard little things." I turned toward her. "You knew I suspected," she admitted. "You always made excuses for him. Maybe she learned that too." The words stung because they were true. I had built a family on my silence. I'd painted over every bruise with laughter, every humiliation with grace. Lydia had learned her father's voice because she had never heard mine. I went back to the dining room. Robert stood by the door, shaking hands with guests, a vision of dignity and ease. Lydia was beside him, accepting compliments on her speech, her dress, her smile. When she caught my eye, she looked genuinely happy. That made it harder. How do you tell your daughter that the man she idolizes has been erasing you both one word at a time? Grace brushed past me, her hand brushing mine just once, a quiet tether. You still have time, she whispered. I didn't answer. The night ended in a blur of flash photography and half-finished toasts. Robert's voice carried above them all, steady, charming, commanding. Lydia beamed. I sat at the far end of the table, applauding at the right moment, smiling through the fog. When the last guest left, I gathered plates while they laughed in the kitchen. Lydia leaned against the counter, her dress glittering under the recessed lights. You okay, Mom? She asked casually. You were quiet tonight. I liked listening, I said. She smirked. You always do. Her words weren't meant to hurt, but they did. I nodded, wiping the table with slow, deliberate movements. Robert came up behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. That's what I love about your mother, he said. She knows her place. The comment hung there, cruel and casual, like perfume that won't fade. Grace, still packing decorations nearby, froze. Her eyes met mine. She didn't speak, but I could read the sentence forming in her mind. This is not love. I straightened up and met his gaze for the first time in years without lowering mine. He blinked, perhaps surprised, then smiled again, recovering. Don't stay up too late, dear, he said, as if nothing had happened. When he and Lydia left the room, smelled of candle wax and champagne. Grace came over, touching my arm gently. You heard him? She said. Yes. What will you do? I don't know yet. But I did. Somewhere deep in the quiet part of me that had survived all those years, a line had been drawn. I couldn't name it, couldn't speak it, but I felt it. As Grace left, I walked to the window overlooking the empty courtyard. The lights were dim now, the flowers drooping from the heat. My reflection in the glass looked like a ghost watching her own life from a distance. Behind me, the laughter of the last staff cleaning up echoed down the hall. It sounded like the rehearsal for something cruel. The night before the ceremony, the house slept under its own nervous breathing. From my bedroom, I could hear the rustle of fabric bags, the muted thuds of boxes being moved, and the soft rhythm of rain tapping the window. The world outside felt clean rinsed, the world inside stifled. I sat on the edge of the bed, a half-packed suitcase beside me. I had packed and unpacked it 3 times, once out of panic, once out of habit, and once because I wanted to see if I still could. My fingers brushed the hem of a navy dress I'd brought just in case. In case what I wasn't sure. Maybe in case courage required an outfit change. A knock sounded. Grace entered quietly, already in her nightclothes, hair tied back. She carried 2 mugs of chamomile tea. You look like you've been arguing with the furniture, she said gently. I smiled faintly. The furniture's winning. She set the mug beside me and sat on the other side of the bed. I heard him downstairs with the caterers earlier. Something about cutting the dessert order. You didn't know. I shook my head. He doesn't tell me about money anymore. Says I overthink things. Grace sighed, rubbing her temples. He's controlling every inch of this wedding. You realize that? Yes, I said, softly, staring at the suitcase. But if I fight him now, Lydia will think I'm jealous. Grace hesitated, studying my face. Is that what keeps you quiet? Her opinion. I think it's habit, I said. It's easier to keep the peace than explain the war. The room filled with the quiet steam from the tea, the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. Grace broke it first. You could still change everything. I looked at her. How? By not showing up, she said simply. By walking away before he writes you out completely. I laughed softly, bitterly. He already did. I'm just playing my last scene. Grace reached over and took my hand. Then rewrite it. Her words lingered after she left. I couldn't sleep. The rain kept whispering against the glass, as if practicing something it had said 1,000 times before. Around midnight, I wandered downstairs. The lights in the dining room were still on. Robert sat at the table, laptop, open phone pressed to his ear. His voice was calm, persuasive, his business voice. "I'm not worried," he said to whoever was on the other end. "She'll behave. She always does." I froze. The air thickened. He hadn't seen me yet. I stood in the hallway's shadow, every cell of my body buzzing. "She's sentimental, not stupid," he continued. "She knows the cost of embarrassment. Lydia gets that from me." The conversation ended. He closed the laptop, poured himself a drink, and finally noticed me. His eyes flickered surprise, then irritation, then the polished smile again. "Couldn't sleep, I heard you talking," I said. "Just work." He leaned back in the chair. "Tomorrow's big. You should get some rest." I stepped closer. "You said I'd behave." He raised a brow. "Did I? You always think you can predict me." He smiled. "It's not prediction, Elaine. It's experience." He took a sip of whiskey. "Don't spoil Lydia's day." Something in his tone, so casual, so certain, snapped the thread holding me still. "You think everything is about control," I said. "Control keeps things from falling apart," he answered smoothly. "No," I said, voice trembling. "It just keeps people afraid to move." He looked at me for a long time, then gave a quiet, condescending laugh. "You always were dramatic." I wanted to scream. Instead, I reached for the tea I'd left on the counter and poured it down the sink, the motion oddly ceremonial. "Good night, Robert." When I returned to my room, I didn't cry. I sat at the vanity, the one he'd bought years ago, and stared at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman in the mirror. Not weak, not broken, just suspended, waiting for gravity to decide which way she'd fall. Grace's words replayed. "Rewrite it." At dawn, I went back to the suitcase. I unpacked everything again, smoothing the navy dress across the bed. I folded the rest neatly away. I wasn't running. Not yet. By the time the first light touched the curtains, I knew what I would do if he crossed one more line. If he mocked me tomorrow, if Lydia followed, there would be no ceremony. Not for them. Not for me. The decision sat beside me like an invisible vow, heavier than any ring I'd ever worn. The morning crept in gray and heavy. I hadn't slept, but I'd stopped trembling. There's a strange calm that arrives after you decide something terrible. You stop fearing collapse, because you've already chosen to let it happen. I found the letter in the back of my jewelry box while searching for earrings. The paper was yellowed, the edges curled, the ink slightly blurred from old humidity. I recognized the handwriting immediately, my own, younger and desperate. The letter began with his name. Robert. I miss the man who used to listen. I don't know where you went. I don't know how to talk to you without being small first. I'm tired of being grateful for what doesn't hurt. I remembered writing it after Lydia's 8th birthday, the night he told me I embarrassed him in front of his colleagues because I forgot the dessert spoons. He'd spent an hour explaining how a woman's grace was measured by her silence. I had written the letter that night and never mailed it. I told myself I'd wait for the right moment. There had never been a right moment. There had only been the next one, and the next, each one swallowed by habit. Now, sitting by the window with the letter trembling in my hands, I could see that younger version of me, the woman still begging him to notice, still hoping politeness might change cruelty. The door creaked softly. Grace entered without knocking, a cup of coffee in hand. "You're up early." "I don't think I went to sleep," I said. She nodded, eyes catching the paper in my hand. "Old letter, very," I said, passing it to her. She read a few lines, her face tightening with empathy. "You wrote this years ago. I thought if I could find the right words, he might remember loving me." Grace folded the letter gently. "And now I see he taught me to love like an apology." She sat beside me, resting her coffee on the sill. "Elaine, you've spent decades translating pain into politeness. It's no wonder your daughter learned that language too." I thought I was teaching her kindness. You were, Grace said softly, but kindness without boundaries is just endurance. I laughed under my breath, a brittle sound. Endurance looks noble in photographs. Then maybe stop posing, she replied. For a moment we just sat there listening to the rain begin again. Grace's words hovered in the quiet like a verdict. I don't know how to start, I whispered. You already did, she said, touching the letter. You just never finished. She left to check the decorations, and I unfolded the letter once more. My reflection on the glass behind it looked faint, almost translucent. I took a pen from the nightstand and wrote one more line at the bottom. You can't hear me, but I'm speaking anyway. Then I folded it neatly and placed it in my purse. Not as a threat, not even as evidence, just a reminder that once I tried to speak. When I stepped into the hallway, Robert's voice drifted from downstairs, calm, commanding, already in control. He was telling the florist to change the arrangement because lilies were too old-fashioned. He hadn't asked what I liked. He never did. I leaned against the banister, watching him through the gaps between the rails. He stood with perfect posture, surrounded by people following his instructions. Lydia hovered beside him, absorbing the rhythm of his certainty. Every time he smiled, she mirrored it. I realized then that this was the legacy. I had built a home so polished it reflected only him. Later, when I passed through the foyer, Grace stopped me. You all right? She asked quietly. I found something, I said. A letter I wrote years ago. Did it help? Yes, I said after a pause. It reminded me who I used to be, and who I won't be again. Grace smiled, brief but proud. Then you're ready. Ready for what? She looked toward the church through the rain-streaked window. For whatever truth shows up today. Her words settled over me like a thin, steady flame, small but impossible to ignore. I went back upstairs to finish getting dressed. My hands no longer shook as I fastened my necklace. When I caught my reflection in the mirror, I didn't see a woman waiting to be spoken for. I saw someone quietly gathering her own voice, one syllable at a time. Downstairs, Robert was laughing with the photographer. Lydia ran by holding her bouquet, her veil catching a ray of weak morning light. I watched them through the open door, that perfect frame. They looked untouchable, almost holy. But somewhere behind my ribs, the air was shifting. I didn't feel afraid anymore. I felt curiously like someone reaching for a match she finally knows how to strike. The air that morning felt different too, still too heavy. The storm had passed, but the quiet it left behind was unnatural, like the pause before a confession. I stood at the edge of the hotel courtyard, watching the staff carry boxes of white roses into waiting vans. Everyone moved with the precision of people trying not to think. Inside the bridal suite was chaos, curling irons, perfume, the faint static crackle of a steamer running too long. Lydia sat in the center of it all, radiant and distracted, phone pressed to her ear. Her bridesmaids fluttered around her like birds. When she saw me, she waved, the gesture quick and bright. Mom, can you check with Dad about the seating chart? He said something about moving Aunt Carol. I nodded, already hearing Robert's voice from the hallway. He was laughing with the event coordinator, that warm, commanding tone he used when he wanted everyone to think he was gracious. Robert, I began as I entered about the seating. He turned, smile fixed. Handled it. Carol can see fine from the back. She'll survive. She's your sister, I said gently. And she knows I run things better when people don't interfere. The coordinator looked down quickly, pretending to check her clipboard. I exhaled slowly. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let's keep the peace today, Elaine. Don't start. I wasn't starting anything. He placed a hand on my arm, too firm, too familiar in its control. His thumb pressed lightly against my wrist. You always find a way to make noise, he whispered. Not today. Something in me stilled. My heart didn't race this time. It just slowed, heavy and deliberate. I looked at the hand on my arm, then at his face. The smile was gone. I'll be quiet, I said. For now. He released me, smirking as if I'd surrendered. But he didn't hear what I meant. For now was a sentence with an expiration date. Back in the bridal suite, Grace was adjusting the veil, her movements precise, careful. She looked up when I entered. "You okay?" she asked under her breath. "Fine," I said, and this time it wasn't a lie. It was preparation. Lydia turned toward me, her expression softening. "Dad says he'll do the introduction before the vows." "You'll speak after, right?" "Yes," I said. "After." She nodded, satisfied, then returned to the mirror. I studied her reflection. Beneath the makeup and excitement, I saw a flicker of nerves, real human, almost childlike. It broke something open in me, a tender ache that didn't cancel the anger, but softened it around the edges. Grace noticed. "You're thinking too loud," she murmured. "I'm wondering if love always looks this much like obedience," I said. She straightened, eyes meeting mine in the mirror. "Only when fear gets dressed up as loyalty." Her words landed heavy, and for a moment I had to look away. The ceremony was scheduled for noon. By 11 the guests were arriving, umbrellas glistening from the drizzle. The scent of flowers filled the corridor, roses, freesia, something faintly metallic underneath. I moved through the noise, smiling when required, nodding when spoken to. Everything looked perfect, which made it harder to breathe. In the dressing room, Robert entered once more to check on Lydia. He kissed her forehead, his tone smooth and paternal. "Remember," he said, "if anything goes wrong, keep smiling. People only see what you show them." She giggled nervously. "I know Dad." That phrase, "I know Dad," it wasn't defiance. It was devotion. He turned to me. "Try not to cry during the vows. You make everything too heavy." I wanted to ask him if he ever noticed the weight he left on everyone else's shoulders, but the words didn't come. Not yet. I simply nodded. After he left, Grace closed the door quietly. "He's tightening the stage lights," she said. "He doesn't see you preparing your own cue." I met her gaze. "He thinks I'll never walk off script." Then changed the ending. Outside, the music began, soft strings, the hum of a hymn. Lydia was called to line up. She turned to me, veil trembling slightly as she breathed. "Mom," she said, "thank you for being calm today." "I'm always calm," I said. "That's what everyone loves about me." She smiled, unaware of the irony, and left with her bridesmaids. When the door closed behind her, I felt the air shift again. Grace's voice was low, urgent. "If he tries to humiliate you in front of her, don't swallow it this time." I looked at my reflection one last time, the faint lines at the corners of my eyes, the steadiness of my jaw. "If he does," I said, "I won't." We stood in silence, the music swelling on the other side of the wall. Then I heard Robert's voice, amplified through the microphone, warm, commanding, every syllable rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "thank you for joining us to celebrate strength, grace, and family." His words echoed faintly through the door, and I felt the decision settle in my bones. If he crossed that line again, if Lydia followed him into cruelty, I would end it. Not privately, not quietly. The warning sign had been written all over the day, and for once, I was reading it clearly. The organ began its slow rise, a sound both sacred and suffocating. I took my seat near the front, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The scent of roses and lilies clung to the air, heavy as perfume. Guests whispered in soft admiration as Lydia appeared at the end of the aisle, her white dress rippling like sunlight on water. Robert walked beside her, chin high, eyes bright with pride. From where I sat, they looked like a picture, flawless, controlled, choreographed. My stomach turned. As they approached the altar, Robert gave the faintest nod toward the crowd, the same gesture he'd always used before speaking. The room quieted. He took the microphone from the priest with easy confidence. "Thank you all for joining us," he said, his voice filling the vaulted ceiling. "Today we celebrate love that endures and the strength of family. My daughter Lydia is proof that grace can be learned, passed down like an heirloom." The guests smiled. I felt the old chill creep along my spine. He continued, glancing briefly at me. "Her mother taught her kindness, and I taught her how to stay calm under pressure." Laughter scattered through the pews, polite expectant, the kind that hides discomfort under civility. My throat tightened, but I stayed still. I'd promised myself one more line, one more humiliation, and I would act. Robert stepped aside for Lydia. She looked radiant, trembling slightly, her hands clutching her bouquet. When she spoke, her voice wavered, sweet, nervous, but her words were not hers. Strong women, she began, pausing just as he always did, before the punchline, know when to stay quiet. The guests laughed again, relieved. Robert beamed. Lydia glanced toward him for approval, and he gave her a proud, fatherly smile. That was the moment the world went still. The laughter dulled into a low hum in my ears. I looked at her, the daughter I had loved so completely, and heard my husband's voice inside her own. The sound of it broke something final in me. I stood. At first, no one noticed. Then a rustle moved through the room, a ripple of confusion. The priest blinked, uncertain. Robert's expression faltered just slightly. I took a step forward. My heels clicked against the marble, the sound too loud in the hush. Lydia's voice faded. "Mom," she whispered. Robert's tone was soft warning. "Elaine, sit down." I didn't. I reached the front and turned toward the crowd. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "but this can't continue." The room seemed to contract, everyone leaning in, waiting for the explanation. "I've listened to these words for 30 years," I said. "I've laughed when they weren't funny, smiled when they hurt. And now, I've heard my daughter repeat them. I can't watch that happen." Lydia's eyes widened. "Mom, please." "No," I said gently. "Not today." Robert moved closer, whispering through clenched teeth. "You're humiliating yourself." I met his eyes. "No, Robert. I'm stopping you." He reached for the microphone, but I held it firm. "Strong women," I said clearly, "don't stay quiet. They stop pretending silence is grace." A collective gasp filled the church. The words hung there heavy and irreversible. Robert tried to laugh it off, but the sound faltered. "She's nervous," he said to the guests. "Big day. A lot of emotion." Grace stepped out from the side aisle, then her calm voice slicing through his performance. "The bride's mother has asked for a moment. Please respect it." Her tone carried authority. The staff froze. The priest looked from me to Robert, uncertain who commanded the room. I turned to Lydia. Her eyes glistened, her face pale. "I love you," I said. "Enough to stop this before it becomes your life." She shook her head slightly, confusion clouding her features. "I don't understand." "You will," I said softly. "Someday." Then I faced the guests again. "There will be no ceremony today. Not until we learn what love sounds like without cruelty." The silence that followed was deeper than shock. It was the kind of silence that happens when truth lands in a room that's never heard it before. I set the microphone down. It made a small final click. Robert's face was unreadable rage stitched over disbelief. "You've lost your mind," he hissed. "No," I said, turning to leave. "I've found it." As I walked down the aisle, the world felt oddly weightless. The gasps, the whispers, the confusion, they didn't matter. I passed the flowers, the candles, the perfect decorations, and felt each step untie another knot in my chest. Halfway down, I heard someone start to clap. Just one person at first. Grace. The sound was small but brave. It spread hesitant at first, then louder. Some guests joined in, unsure what they were applauding, but sensing it was deserved. Robert's voice called after me, sharp and impotent, but I didn't turn. When I reached the doors, I looked back once, not at him, but at Lydia. Her veil shimmered, trembling in the draft. She wasn't smiling anymore. I pushed open the doors, and sunlight poured in, cold, pure, and blinding. The church doors closed behind me, with a sound that seemed to echo forever. Outside, the world was still. No birds, no traffic, just the hollow thud of my heartbeat in my ears. I stood on the steps, the wind pulling gently at my hair, my body unsure whether it had just destroyed everything or finally been set free. Then faintly, I heard it, the murmuring. The low, shifting hum of voices spilling out from the sanctuary, like water from a cracked glass. No one dared to follow yet. They were waiting for permission to react. I walked down the steps, each one feeling like an unbinding. My shoes clicked softly against the stone. The sound no longer felt like intrusion, but declaration. The air smelled of rain and roses left too long in the sun. Behind me, the doors creaked open. Grace emerged first. She didn't rush. She simply stood beside me, clipboard still clutched in her hands, as if she were protecting the chaos inside from spilling too far. "You did it," she said quietly. "I didn't plan to," I whispered. "It just needed to happen," she finished. We stood there in silence, the kind that wasn't empty, but full alive with the weight of what couldn't be unsaid. Through the glass doors I could see Robert gesturing furiously at the priest. Lydia stood motionless near the altar, bouquet slipping from her hands. Grace touched my arm gently. "You should step away before he comes out." "I'm not hiding," I said. "I didn't think you were," she replied, her voice low but steady. "But you don't owe him a stage anymore." I looked toward the parking lot, rows of polished cars glinting under pale sunlight. "Everything in there looks the same," I said. "Perfect. Still pretending." "Let it stay that way," Grace said. "You've already told the truth." Through the doorway, a wave of voices grew louder. Someone shouted my name, Robert, sharp and commanding. His voice cracked with a fury he could no longer disguise. Grace moved between us and the entrance. "I'll handle it," she said. "Go to the side garden. I'll come find you." I hesitated. "He'll twist it. He always does." But this time people saw it happen. Her confidence anchored me. I nodded and turned toward the path that led around the building. The stone was slick with drizzle. Each step away from the church felt like leaving an old skin behind. The garden was quiet, small fountains, pale hydrangeas, heavy with water benches glimmering with dew. I sat beneath the canopy of a sycamore tree, the hem of my dress damp against the stone bench. My hands shook as the adrenaline faded. Inside, I could still hear the muffled rise and fall of voices, a storm muffled by walls. I imagined Robert's face controlled, then cracking. Lydia's confusion. The guests pretending to understand while checking their phones for something easier to digest. After a few minutes, Grace appeared again, her expression calm but alert. "He's trying to downplay it," she said. "Told everyone you had an episode." I laughed softly, the sound foreign in my own throat. "Of course he did. I told them the ceremony was postponed. The staff will start clearing soon." I looked at her. "Postponed?" She smiled faintly. "It buys you space. People love a tidy explanation." I leaned back against the bench. I didn't expect it to feel this quiet. That's what truth sounds like when you've lived around noise too long. Her words landed gently but deeply. The garden's silence wrapped around us, not oppressive, but strangely merciful. A few guests trickled out through the side doors, avoiding eye contact as they passed. Some whispered apologies, others only stared. I recognized faces that had laughed with us for decades. Now they didn't know which of us to pity. Grace watched them leave. "Give it time," she said. "Eventually they'll remember what they saw more than what he tells them." "I don't care what they think." She arched an eyebrow. "You do. You just don't want to anymore." I smiled, small but real. "Maybe you're right." When I finally stood, the weight of the decision settled in my bones, not as regret, but as something that could finally rest. "I should go," I said. "Where? Anywhere that isn't built on pretending." Grace nodded. "I'll make sure the staff stops the music." "And Elaine?" "Yes, you didn't destroy anything. You revealed it." Her words followed me as I walked toward the edge of the parking lot. I didn't look back at the church. The sound of Robert's voice, angry distant, was swallowed by the wind. When I reached my car, I opened the door and hesitated. The bouquet Lydia had made for me the night before lay on the seat, its petals already starting to bruise. I lifted it gently and set it on the sidewalk. Then, for the first time in years, I sat in silence that belonged only to me, unpolished, unafraid, and profoundly alive. The air outside the church felt cooler now, as if the storm had cleared something larger than the weather. The street shimmered faintly with the residue of rain, and I stood at the curb feeling lighter and heavier at once, light from the truth that had finally escaped my throat, heavy from everything it had broken on its way out. Grace walked beside me, her clipboard gone, her hands tucked into her coat pockets. "The guests are trickling out," she said. "Robert's still inside pretending to manage damage control." "That sounds like him," I murmured. She nodded toward the street. "You can leave, you know. No one can stop you now." The idea seemed simple, almost ridiculous in its obviousness. Leave. I hadn't left anything on my own terms in years. "I'll need to cancel the reception," I said, half to myself. "Already did," she said. "Told the caterer to pack up. Said the family decided to have a private dinner instead." I smiled faintly. "You're good at rewriting endings." Grace shrugged. "Someone has to be." We stood there watching the guests cluster in uneasy circles near the church doors. Their voices were low, curious, confused. A few glanced my way, the kind of glances that pretend not to stare. None of them spoke to me. "That's the price of truth," Grace said, reading my silence. "Everyone wants it until it makes them uncomfortable." I took a deep breath. "They'll believe whatever story he tells first." "For a while," she said. "But they all saw it. Even if they don't admit it yet, they saw what happened." Across the street, the floral truck idled, the driver waiting for instruction. I walked over, my heels clicking against the wet pavement. The man looked surprised to see me. "Can you take the flowers back?" I asked. He blinked. "All of them. All of them," I said. "There's no wedding today." He hesitated, searching my face for some trace of explanation, then nodded. "I'll take care of it." When I turned back, Grace was smiling. "You really mean it, don't you?" "Yes," I said simply. "No wedding, no pretending." A gust of wind lifted the edge of my dress. The bouquet I'd left on the curb earlier had begun to scatter petals, drifting across the sidewalk like fragments of a ceremony that never happened. I watched them tumble and thought how beautiful endings could look when you stopped trying to fix them. A black car pulled up Roberts. The driver stepped out, opening the back door, but no one got in. The church doors remained closed. I wondered if he was watching me through the glass, still expecting me to return and smooth things over. Grace followed my gaze. "You don't have to wait for him," she said. "I'm not," I answered. "I'm saying goodbye. To him. To the woman who thought she needed his permission to leave." Grace let out a quiet breath that sounded almost like relief. We started walking. The pavement glittered under a thin slice of sun breaking through the clouds. My shoes soaked through, but I didn't care. The world smelled of wet concrete and roses, sharp and clean. Halfway down the block, I heard the church doors open behind us. Robert's voice echoed faintly, angry and incredulous, calling my name. I didn't turn. The sound faded, with every step shrinking into background noise. Grace's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and grimaced. "He's trying to get the planner group chat on his side. I'll handle it later." "Let him," I said. "He's always needed an audience. I'm just retiring from the play." We reached the corner. The city beyond looked ordinary: cars, coffee shops, people laughing on patios. For a moment it felt obscene that the world could keep turning after mine had split open. But maybe that was the point. The world didn't end, it just made space for something new. Grace stopped beside me. "What now? I don't know," I said. "I might drive to the coast, stay somewhere quiet, write a letter to Lydia." "She'll need time," Grace said gently. "So will I." The wind shifted, carrying the faint echo of organ music from inside the church, the last notes fading out. It sounded less like a hymn now, and more like an ending. I turned to Grace. "Thank you." "For what?" "For standing beside me when I finally stood up." She smiled, small and proud. Someone had to clap first. We both laughed softly. Then I exhaled a long, shaking breath that felt like the first one of my real life. I looked down at my hands. They weren't trembling anymore. Without another word, we crossed the street and kept walking until the church disappeared behind us. The road stretched ahead, gray, damp, endless, but it didn't scare me. It just looked honest. The hotel parking lot was almost empty when I pulled in later that afternoon. The rain had stopped, leaving puddles that mirrored the gray sky. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. My body felt drained, but underneath the fatigue was something steadier, resolve, raw and unyielding. I knew Robert would come. He wouldn't let the narrative end without his version of it being stamped on top of mine. He'd want control, an audience, a performance to reclaim. When the black sedan pulled in beside my car, I didn't flinch. The door opened and he stepped out, still wearing his suit tie, loosened face taut with fury, disguised as composure. "Elaine," he said, his voice low and measured. "Get out of the car." I opened the door but didn't move away. "You don't have to pretend calm anymore. There's no one left to impress." His jaw tightened. "Do you have any idea what you've done? You humiliated our family. You ruined your daughter's wedding." I stood then, meeting him at eye level. I stopped a performance. "There was never a wedding, Robert, just another show where you got to write everyone's lines. You're overreacting." "No," I said. "I'm finally reacting." He stepped closer, his voice dropping into that sharp, familiar whisper. "People are calling. Friends, colleagues. They think you've lost it. Do you understand what this looks like?" "Yes," I said evenly. "It looks like truth. You've spent your entire life making sure people saw the version of us you could control. But they saw something else today, something real." He laughed, a cold, incredulous sound. "You think you're some kind of hero? You embarrassed Lydia in front of everyone she knows. She'll never forgive you." My throat tightened, but I didn't look away. "Then she'll forgive me later, when she realizes I was trying to save her from becoming me." He moved closer, his voice breaking into something rougher. "You made me the villain. You did that yourself," I said quietly. For a long moment we just stared at each other. Two actors at the end of a play that had run too long. The silence between us was heavy, filled with 30 years of lines I'd never said. Finally, he said, "You think anyone's going to believe your side?" "I don't need them to," I answered. "I just need to stop believing yours." He exhaled sharply, frustrated. "You've always had a flair for drama." "That's what you called it when I cried," I said. "Drama. When I asked for help, when I begged you to stop talking to me like a child. It was never emotion to you, it was performance." I stepped closer until he had to look at me. "But here's the truth, Robert. I learned the act from you." He blinked, stunned by the calm in my voice. "That's why you hate what I did today," I continued. "Because for once, I took your script and rewrote it in public." His hands clenched at his sides, his mask slipping. "You don't know what you've started. I know exactly what I've ended." At that moment, Grace appeared at the edge of the lot, holding her phone in one hand. Her presence was quiet, but deliberate. "I think that's enough," she said softly. Robert turned sharply. "You stay out of this." Grace didn't move. "I already am involved," she said. "I heard everything." He froze. She lifted the phone slightly. "You don't need to worry. I'm not sending it anywhere unless I have to. But you should leave her alone now." For a second, the air seemed to crackle with something dangerous. Robert's eyes flicked between us, calculating wounded pride turning to something colder. Then he straightened his tie, restoring his practiced civility. "You two are pathetic," he said finally. "You'll regret this." "I already did," I said. "For 30 years." He turned, walked back to his car, and drove off without another word. The taillights disappeared down the wet road, leaving behind only the faint smell of exhaust. Grace lowered the phone, her expression unreadable. "You all right?" "I think so," I said, though my knees felt weak. She came closer, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. You sounded strong. I wasn't acting this time, I said. She smiled faintly. He's not used to anyone staying on stage after he exits. The joke broke something loose in me, and I laughed a raw, uneven sound that turned quickly into tears. Grace didn't say anything. She just stood beside me, letting me fall apart in peace. When I finally stopped crying, the world felt different, emptier, but not hollow. The air was still damp, but the sky had started to lighten. What now? Grace asked. I don't know, I said. But for the first time, not knowing feels like freedom. We stood there for a long time watching the puddles ripple in the breeze. The reflection of the sky was broken, but still beautiful. I realized then that broken didn't mean ruined, it just meant visible. The next morning came pale and quiet, a fragile kind of stillness that followed storms. I hadn't planned to go back to the church, but I found myself driving there anyway, drawn by the unfinished shape of something between me and Lydia. The parking lot was nearly empty. The florists had taken what they could. The rest, wilting petals, overturned ribbons. Half-deflated balloons lay scattered across the ground, like the aftermath of a festival no one wanted to remember. I saw her near the side garden, sitting on the bench beneath the sycamore tree. She wasn't wearing her dress anymore. Just jeans and one of Robert's old sweaters, the sleeves too long for her hands. She looked small, almost young again. When she heard my footsteps, she turned quickly, her eyes rimmed red. Mom, she said, her voice raw. I stopped a few feet away. I didn't think you'd want to see me. I wasn't sure I did, she admitted. But I didn't know where else to go. The honesty of it caught me off guard. I nodded slowly and sat beside her. The bench was damp from the night rain. The cold soaked through the fabric of my dress. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air between us was heavy with all the words we hadn't said. Finally, she whispered, You embarrassed us. I know I said. You humiliated Dad. I know that too. She turned toward me, anger flickering through her tears. Why did you do it like that in front of everyone? Because I'd already done it quietly, I said. For years, and no one ever heard me. She looked away, biting her lip. He said you planned it, that you wanted attention. I almost laughed, but the sound never made it out. He would say that. It's the only way he knows how to explain losing control. She stared at the ground. I thought you were overreacting. But then last night after he came home, he was different. Different how? She hesitated. Angry. But not about the wedding. About you. He kept saying you ruined everything, that you made him look weak. I tried to calm him down, and he told me I was sounding just like you. The words hung there, trembling between us. I felt the ache in my chest tighten, but I stayed quiet. I didn't like how that felt. She continued. It scared me. You heard yourself, I said softly. That's how it starts, learning to talk in someone else's voice. Lydia brushed a tear away angrily. I don't know what to think anymore. You don't have to think yet, I said. Just notice, the way he talks to you, the way you feel after he leaves the room. She nodded faintly. He said he might go stay with Uncle David for a while. Good, I said. Maybe distance will make things quieter. She looked at me, then really looked at me. Are you leaving too? I don't know yet, I admitted. Maybe for a little while. I need to remember who I am without his voice in the room. Her eyes filled again. You sound different. I feel different. We sat in silence, the wind stirring the fallen petals around our feet. She reached out, almost hesitant, and took my hand. It was the first time she'd done that since she was a child. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said. I know. You were only repeating what you were taught. Her grip tightened. I don't want to be like him. Then don't be, I said. You get to choose. She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks. It's going to take time. It always does, I said. We stayed there until the morning light began to sharpen. The church doors creaked as workers entered to finish cleaning, but we didn't move. For once, the silence between us didn't feel like distance, it felt like possibility. Before we left, she stood and faced me. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet," she said. "I don't expect you to," I replied. "Just don't forgive the lie." She took a long breath, then whispered, "Okay." It wasn't a reconciliation. It wasn't peace. But it was the first honest word between us in years. As she walked away toward her car, I noticed the veil she'd left behind on the bench. I picked it up, folded it carefully, and held it against my chest. It smelled faintly of rain and roses, something ending, something beginning. When I looked up, Lydia was watching from a distance. She raised her hand a small uncertain wave. I returned it. It was enough. The sky that afternoon was a thin, pale blue, the kind that looks almost transparent, as if the world is still deciding what to be. I sat on the porch of Grace's small house outside town, wrapped in one of her old blankets, the kind that smelled faintly of lavender and rain. It had been 3 days since the wedding that wasn't. The silence had settled around me, like new air, strange, weightless, honest. Grace came out carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She didn't ask if I wanted one. She just handed it over and sat beside me. "You're starting to look human again," she said softly. "I didn't know I'd stopped." She smiled. "You were living on adrenaline and heartbreak. It's a miracle you're upright." I took a sip of the coffee. It was strong, slightly bitter. The warmth steadied my hands. "Has he called?" Grace shook her head. "Not directly. He sent a statement to the guests, said the ceremony was postponed due to emotional distress. That's his version of an apology." I almost laughed. "He can't admit something happened unless he's editing it." Grace set her mug down. "Speaking of editing," she reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. "I saved this for when you were ready." I stared at the screen. It was paused on a frame from the parking lot, the confrontation. Me standing with my back to the car, Robert's face twisted with the kind of anger he usually reserved for private moments. "You recorded it?" "Just the end," she said. "Enough to remember the truth. You don't have to watch it, but you should know it exists." I hesitated, then nodded. "Play it." She hit the screen, and the voices filled the quiet porch. His anger, my calm, the sound of my own voice steady and sure. I know exactly what I've ended. The camera shook slightly. Grace's breathing could be heard. Then his car door slammed, and I stood alone in the puddled lot. The clip ended. For a long moment I couldn't speak. My throat felt thick. "I didn't realize how small he looked," I said finally. "How big the silence was after he left." Grace nodded. "You don't need to show it to anyone. I just wanted you to have it." I looked out at the empty road beyond the porch. Maybe one day Lydia will need to see it. Not now. Not while she's still figuring out who she is without him. Grace studied me. "You sound at peace." "Not peace," I said. "Just quiet I can stand to hear." We sat there a while longer, the sound of wind moving through the trees. Somewhere in the distance a dog barked, then fell silent again. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. Ending it that way, I shook my head. "No. I regret not ending it sooner." Grace smiled faintly. "You know there's something about women like us. We mistake endurance for devotion until someone makes us look at it in daylight." "I think I was waiting for permission," I said. "You gave it to yourself." We sat without speaking for a long time. The sun drifted lower, and the light on the porch turned gold and soft. I scrolled through my phone, hovering over Lydia's contact. I hadn't messaged her since that morning in the garden. Finally, I typed, "I hope you're taking care of yourself. You don't have to understand everything right now. Just listen to your own voice when it speaks. Love, Mom." I stared at it for a while before hitting send. The message showed delivered, but not read. That was enough. Grace looked over. "What did you say?" "Something small," I said. "Something true." When the sky deepened into dusk, I stood and walked to the edge of the porch. The air smelled like pine and wet earth. I thought of the church again, the petals, the voices, the altar left unfinished. Then I thought of the recording, the proof, the silence, the steady sound of my own voice saying no after 30 years of pretending I didn't know how. "I think I'll keep it," I said quietly, not to use against him, just to remember that I wasn't imagining it. Grace smiled. "Proof of life." "Exactly." The first star blinked faintly above the horizon. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the stillness stretch. It wasn't victory I felt, just something deeper, harder to name. The kind of peace that comes when the world finally stops asking you to perform. When I opened my eyes, Grace was looking at me with quiet pride. "You're free," she said simply. I nodded. For the first time, I believe it. The week after everything ended, I went back to the church. I told myself it was for closure, though part of me wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The parking lot was empty, the asphalt glittering with frost under the pale morning light. The heavy doors creaked when I pushed them open. Inside, the air was cold and still. The scent of wax and lilies lingered faintly, mixed with something older dust wood polish. Silence that had settled back into the walls. The aisle looked different without the guests. The flowers, the weight of eyes. Only a few wilted petals remained near the front pews, fragile reminders of a performance that had finally lost its audience. I walked down slowly, my footsteps soft against the marble. Every sound echoed longer than it should have, as if the building were still holding its breath. When I reached the altar, I paused. The microphone was gone. So was the arch, the candles, the decorations that had turned this place into a stage. What remained was bare and beautiful. For a long moment, I simply stood there. The last time I'd been in this spot, I'd been shaking, defiant, terrified. Now I felt none of that. Only quiet. I sat in the front pew, folded my hands, and let the light from the stained glass windows fall across my skin. The colors amber, green, and blue moved gently as the clouds passed. They painted me in fragments, each one soft and incomplete. I whispered into the stillness, "I'm not sorry." The words sounded small at first, then larger as they echoed off the stone. I thought of Lydia, her uncertain wave, her trembling voice, her choice to see me again at all. I thought of Robert's car driving away, of Grace's steady hand on my shoulder, of the recording I hadn't deleted. Proof that the truth had finally happened out loud. I looked up at the cross, hanging above the altar, the one that had seemed distant and judgmental that day. Now it only looked quiet, like it was listening. "I stayed quiet for too long," I said softly. I thought that was strength. But it was just fear with good manners. A faint warmth spread across the pew as sunlight slipped through the glass. Dust rose in slow spirals, catching the light like smoke. I closed my eyes and breathed. The sound of my breath filled the church, steady and rhythmic, the same rhythm that used to tremble under someone else's voice. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch from the sound of myself. After a while, I stood and walked to the altar rail. The wood was cool under my fingertips. I imagined Lydia standing here someday, not in a dress chosen for her, not under someone's words, but as herself, unafraid to speak. "Let it end here," I whispered, "and let her begin somewhere else." When I turned to leave, I noticed something glinting near the end of the aisle, a single pearl that must have come loose from Lydia's necklace. I bent to pick it up. It was small, smooth, weightless in my palm. I smiled. Outside, the sun had risen higher, melting the frost on the steps. I walked down slowly, feeling the light on my face. The world didn't feel like an ending anymore. It felt like morning. At the bottom of the stairs, I opened my hand and let the pearl fall onto the grass. It sank into the soil with a faint shimmer, disappearing into something new. I stood there a moment longer, breathing in the cool air. My dress moved gently in the wind, the sound soft and unhurried. Then I walked away. No audience, no applause, no weight left to carry. Just me, the open day, and a silence that finally felt like home.